Okay. So Mindy, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and dive right in?
So I'm Mindy Kalchman. I'm an associate professor in the College of Education, also at DePaul. And my background is actually as first an elementary teacher, and then my graduate work is in developmental cognitive psychology, which is how people learn, essentially, and um, and specific to math education. And so most of my career has been around understanding how kids learn math, mostly from birth to adulthood, but then to use that to train teachers, right? So I'm not about teaching. I'm not about teaching people how to teach. I'm about teaching teachers to understand how people learn so that they can adapt their instruction and use curriculum materials accordingly. For the last dozen or so years, most of my work has been, or a lot of my work has been with practicing teachers in the Chicago public schools in the underserved communities, and we have many, many of them. We have what are called areas in the Chicago public schools. And, these are working with teachers who work in schools with very, very high absentee rates. The last school I was in, in addition to my Inside Out class, I was in a school that was 15th, 11 blocks from the county jail, 15th in California. So those are the schools that we're in. And so what I do with my classes and with my teachers is to get them to stop thinking about how to do the math and how to teach it, but how to use their what we call assets. What are you bringing to these problems? How do you understand them? What makes sense to you? What doesn't make sense to you? And to work collaboratively. So before I bring up my slides, I worked for about a dozen years co-teaching with a mathematician who retired a couple of years ago. And what I learned from Lynn, and we taught practicing teachers from preschool through to secondary. And what we learned about those teachers was, in keeping with what urban education will tell us, is that teachers in urban environments don't tend to trust their students. They believe they can think for themselves. They don't think that they can solve complex problems because they're so worried about behavior. And that's a whole different issue, and I'll come to that. But what I learned from Lynn is that mathematicians think and work slowly. They are not interested in speed. I was just telling Lori that Lynn's probably the slowest thinker I've ever worked with, but she's also methodical. And it is not about getting things right. It's about reasoning. Mathematics is a topic in which you're supposed to be stuck, because if you're not stuck, then you're not making progress. And if you compare that to what we think about in school, it's like if you don't get it right, there's something wrong with you, right? You must be dumb. And so mathematicians are almost always stuck. And that leads to mathematicians are collaborative. They work together. Because they get stuck, they approach colleagues. I used to hear, in the hallways, they talk about it. And that's something else that doesn't happen typically in schools. You have to work by yourself. You're tested by yourself. And if you, I have so many stories from the guys on the inside about if you lean over to ask somebody what they did or how they're thinking about something, you're cheating. And then, you're banished somehow. And anyway, so that's kind of how I come to this. And so when I'll start my slides because that'll kind of help. I'm gonna do this. Oh, wait, how do I move it to slideshow? How do I get rid of that? View. I don't use D2L either. Okay. So this was actually Lori's original thought of how to build this, right? Personal growth and social change by doing math, because I'm curious, apart from Javier, like why did you come to this? Like what drew you to come to see Inside Out doing math? So I guess Marissa, Lucy, Jason, probably because you're doing the next one, maybe, but we have.
I actually just went to class this morning, with Professor Sutton from the sociology department, and he had mentioned that this Zoom was happening at 3 to 4:15, and it's right before my practice time, and it sounded really interesting. So I appreciate you having me on here today. So I'm just here to listen and just learn.
Okay. And Lucy, what about you?
Yeah, I'm the director of our prison education program at Warren Wilson, and um, so many of our students at Western Correctional ask for math, and it is a general education requirement that it would be great if we could add to our rotation. I am a social work professor. I am not a mathematician in any way.
So I'm not a mathematician either, just so you know. I'm not a mathematician. I like math. I enjoy it. I'm slow. But when I went back to grad school, I realized I didn't actually know any math. I only had a really good memory. Hi there, it's Santa. I just had a really good memory. And what I had to do was kind of unthink everything I thought I knew and start from scratch again to understand things. So everything I do with students, I've done myself. So that's, don't worry that you're not a mathematician. And as I was just telling Lori, I invite the chair of our math department to our final day, and I get very, very anxious because he is a real mathematician, and I'm always afraid he's going to say, you know, Mindy, that wasn't really math, but he hasn't said that yet. So and I do consult him. I will say I do consult him and ask him things. So, Jason.
Yeah, I was intrigued by the name of your course. I mean, the word agency, math with agency, that popped out to me. I thought that was cool, so I wanted to learn more about that.
Okay. Anne, Javi.
So my first thoughts are always, even when you proposed the class, I was like, really? How is this gonna work? So a part of me is like almost intimidated maybe because it's math, right? And so I would imagine as any insider, like, okay, let me keep looking through the catalog to see what else is being offered. But a part of me has always learned that in maybe some of the more difficult classes, I've learned the most. And so I've always, I guess that's the part that I'm torn with because I feel intimidated because it's math. But I also, in my experience, have always learned that I usually learn the best from the toughest professors. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to learn from the best.
Yeah. Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I'm a social worker too, and I really don't do a lot of math unless I absolutely have to. But I was most curious on how you would pull in math to the inside out approach and how that dovetails with the curriculum and how it can help push towards social justice. I mean, I think it's a fascinating idea, and it gets more to the STEM work that I think more and more instructors are interested in.
Okay. Okay, so then thank you. So that's very helpful. How do oh, these are our t-shirts. I thought I'd show you. We have a uniform, just like the inside students. So Lucy, you're shaking your head. I hope you do too. So Javi knows more about these, but these are student designed. And so we all wear these when we go in. Just thought I'd do a little, that's the art portion of this class.
Is that front and back?
Yeah, so the inside out that's the front, and then the books on the back is the back. We have every year it's a little bit different. It's different from last year. But these ones are blue. You can't really see that, but these are blue. Last year they were gray. So maybe this is the gray one. That's our uniform. Okay. So let me go back to this. So I told you a little bit about why this course. So I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit more. So I've been teaching at the college level for over 20 years. And it never ceases to amaze me that no matter who my students are, I could be teaching undergraduate honor students. I can be teaching, a lot of it is elementary, people becoming teachers. As soon as you introduce math, kind of what Javi just said, like they freeze up. right? They feel like they're going to be judged. They don't want to answer questions. They're defensive about their math skills. It's like, it doesn't matter where I am, that happens. I could be at a party, I can be in a classroom. That's what happens for a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of them. And so math is this thing in society that seems to tell us, are you smart or not smart? So if you were one of the good math students in school, you were the smart kid. If you didn't, you had to kind of find a way to have academic currency. And so if students' assets, meaning like if what they bring to the table isn't that you can flawlessly follow directions. I have two of my own sons have maybe the worst ADHD on the planet and can't follow directions. If you're not a good memorizer, if you can't reproduce what other people tell you really quickly, you're kind of automatically marginalized from a school math program, right? And you're probably not thought to be not smart when that happens, and you shut down, and I'm not a math person, and that's just anybody. Now imagine that you're in an urban education system where everything's already stacked against you, where urban research and urban education will tell you that teachers already have low expectations of you. Teachers already don't trust their students to solve problems, and they're more concerned about students' behavior than their skills and what they can do. So then further imagine, right, students going to school using a commercial curriculum where they never see themselves, they don't see their names represented, they don't see their communities represented, they don't see, they're talking about problems where people are flying off to places for vacations, to calculate speed and distance. So imagine now, in addition, you have a curriculum that you're never represented. And so when I learned about Inside Out, I immediately thought of some sort of math class, math course, because, oops, sorry about that, because it seemed that no matter who you are, I'm looking for that common bond, and no matter who you are, there seems to be a lack of agency in a math class. No matter who you are and where you're coming from, being able to be yourself seems to be lacking. You can't be vulnerable. You can't make mistakes. You can't misbehave. That's what I kind of saw as a glue from my work in urban education, urban math education, and my experience as a college professor. And so I don't know what I wrote here. Further, it's a subject that I know that being an honor student. It's a subject that I know that being an honor student, having a master's degree in education, being incarcerated, it does not preclude anybody's innate ability to see relationships. So I'm a developmental psychologist. That means I study how people learn. Jean Piaget was, kind of my guru. And Jean Piaget would talk about the innate human ability to see relationships among things, right? Something as simple as summer hot, winter cold. Like, we see these relationships within our worlds, and mathematics is just relationships and patterns. It's relationships and patterns, and we all have that innate ability. Doesn't matter where we come from. It's a matter of how we bring those understandings and what kind of relationships we experience that we bring to the classroom. So that's where this began. And now I have to say, I can only move it if I don't want to. So here's the course. This is what it says, that in the course description, in our course catalog, it says we explore ways of doing math for personal growth and social change. We draw from our identities to make meaning from authentic problems that require basic skills with mathematics. We compare individual approaches to and strategies for doing mathematics based on our prior experiences and personal applications of mathematics. That's what the catalog says. And then also in the syllabus is a little bit about the Inside Out praxis, which I've plagiarized. Thank you, Lori, for that. Here's what happens in every class session. We start in with a check-in and a social question. So a social question, it's a little bit different from the wagon wheels we do, but they're meant to kind of open up discourse. So one of my favorites was, if you could be any animal, what would it be, right? And then you talk about, why that is. Another one that was really eye-opening for me was, it was right after the Olympics. What sport do you enjoy watching? not playing, watching. And this was super interesting because we learned that some of the inside students didn't know there were sports beyond basketball in the Olympics. And so that was a really interesting, we started talking about that was an entry into their world, right? That we could then talk about. So we have a check-in and a social question. And then we have what we call in math education, a math talk or a perceptual problem. I'll show you what those look like. Then we discuss an assigned reading. We have 3-hour classes, by the way, 3 hours and 3 to 3.5 hours. Then we work on a harder math problem. And then we come back and we discuss what we did and we have a checkout. So that's how every class session is divided. So here are just some of the sample social questions. If you could be any animal, if you could be friends with any fictional character, who would it be and why? Turns out me and one of the inside guys really wanted to be friends with Batman. And then there were, that's kind of fun to see some of those common things. So those were social questions. This was maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then we get into these perceptual problems. So these aren't hard math problems. So I break them up into groups. Sometimes they're pairs, sometimes they're 3 to 4. Often they start as pairs and then want to go talk to somebody else. So this one, we have a lot of would you rathers. So this is a pretty straightforward, probably what you do in school, right? Buy 6 donuts for $4.50. You divide the $4.50 by 6 to figure out how much each donut is, or buy a dozen divided by 12. But is that really the end of the problem? Here's what happens. But what if I don't want 12 donuts? Right? I'd rather buy the 6 donuts because, so these are what the students talk about, right? And I would say more the inside students than the outside students, because outside students feel like they're just about getting an answer. And outside students learn from the inside students that there's nuance here. Just because each donut in the dozen is less than each donut in the 6 doesn't mean it's a better choice. If you're not going to eat 12 donuts, it's the better choice. So that's one example how we would use math and then discuss about which one you would choose. This was a very popular one. I'm sure this is familiar to Javi. Would you rather make $50,000 per year when everyone around you makes $25,000 per year, or make $100,000 per year when everyone around you makes $200,000 per year? So this was a very heated discussion. There's never consensus on the answers to any of these perceptual problems. So Javi, I'm going to ask Javi here, what were some of the students when you met them in our final day talking about this particular problem? Because I know 2 of the groups chose this as an example.
I think the class probably had an impact on people because I felt like they were more altruistic and sided with the second option, understanding that it's a betterment for society. But it's hard to convince people in a very individualistic society that we live in that it's like the first one is the one that we are taught or trained to kind of assume or choose. So I think it requires this sort of movement that they had to come as a group together to get to the second one. So I thought it was a great transformation to hear them speak about the movement and why they felt one over the other.
Yeah, and that's a good point. There's a lot of movement, right? They start with that, and then they start hearing things like, well, if I'm making $100,000 a year and everybody else is making $200,000 a year, how much is it? How am I going to be able to have enough money, right? First of all, when everybody has more money to spend, but then like, do I want to feel like I have to do more? There was so much to it that they had to understand all of the things about annual income, how you spend your income, the social capital, right? For how much money you have and don't have, community. One of our outside students was living on a commune. And so that was super interesting that she brought in her experiences. So this was another example of a perceptual problem that had good. And this is another example. I have lots and lots of these because we did many, many of them. But this one we did kind of leading up the month before Thanksgiving. Which of these tables would you rather have for a family meal? And this was, I didn't even imagine it would go into this. So they were building and drawing like little models and how many people you could sit. And then they're having these conversations about, well, if we have the long rectangular, that might be better because, you know, this person doesn't talk to this person and they could be at opposite ends of the table. But if we want a table where everybody can communicate with each other, then we want this. And then they're looking at how big a lazy Susan would have to be in the middle of the table to share a tremendous amount of math is discussed in these really simple, straightforward, what I call perceptual problems. And in fact, when I did the debrief, a lot of the students inside and outside said they wanted more of these because it's what got them really talking to each other and hearing about their experiences and looking at something like this about, you know, how big is your family, right? And what does that look like? And, you know, how does it changed over time? So these kinds of problems they thought really brought individual identities to the table, individual agency to the table. I want this kind of table because this is who I am and this is what I need. And so this one was particularly interesting. And then we looked at, so some of you don't know, there's a paper ban at the Cook County Jail. And I cannot bring in readings and such every week. And there's no electronics, obviously. And so after learning from last year, I decided what I was going to do is bring in before the class started every article we were going to talk about, and they just stay in the jail. And because I can't have students do homework, which Javi, you're going to find this in Cook County, because they can't bring it back in. And what's the point in having them do homework if you can't bring it back in and talk about it after? And you can't because you can't bring paper in. So I decided this year these are all short articles, and we were going to read them together and talk about them first as a group and then in smaller groups and come back together. So I have like little snippets of what these articles look like and what they were about and how they brought together the inside out spirit and math. So the first thing was this shifting focus, which is from deficits to assets. And this is about the way that it's written. It's like a grandfather who's talking about, he had a grandson who had some special needs, and this grandson didn't learn to walk and talk with all of his challenges by people constantly telling him what he was doing wrong. That's a very powerful beginning. And then it gets into the educational aspect of it, which is you're going to get more growth and development out of people when you focus on what they can do and how they can use those assets to move into learning new things than if you start pointing out all of the things they do wrong, which is typically what happens in math, right? No, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, fix this. And, you know, if you think about when we could write essays in school, we're always allowed to have drafts and make revisions. How often did your math teacher say, you know, do this problem in draft form and then give it to me and I'll give you feedback and then you're going to revise it and I'll give it back to you. So we started with this idea of deficits to assets. And again, this article calls on educators to undergo critical self-reflection to expose their personal professional beliefs to best support the learning communities of their students. So that's the first one. We do it together, and then we do an activity that relates to the article. So in this case, they had to talk about what are their assets? What assets are you bringing to this space? The next article we did was called The Difference Between Instrumental and Relational Understanding. This is a very seminal math piece, which is the difference between, he talks about it if you're walking through a park and somebody's given you a map and you can follow it to get from point A to point B, but if you go off the path, you're kind of screwed because you haven't really developed your own understanding of the park and the paths, versus relational understanding, which is you let people loose in the park and say, figure your way out to the other end. And if there's a roadblock somewhere, it's okay. You can find another way to do it. And the relationship to math is, of course, we're taught ways of doing this. And if you go in another direction or you're thinking about it in a different way, there's a good chance your teacher won't even understand what you've done. And that's kind of not okay. You have to do it how the book shows you to or how it is. And usually it's relational understanding that people are going to spontaneously start to work towards, because they're going to make sense of it through their own lens and their own experiences, their own agencies, their own identities. Instrumental learning is somebody else's thinking, somebody else's way of doing things. And I find it very hard when people tell me how to do something when I already have an idea of how I want to do it. And so was that article. This was 8 unproductive practices in developing fact fluency. You don't have to go through that. That's really what we call rules that expire. Believe it or not, 1 million rules that you learn in elementary school don't really hold true when you get later. So you spend all this time memorizing rules, and then it's not really that useful to you. So those were the first 3. Then we get into habits of mind, which we have 2 articles about this, and I'll just show you this. These are the habits of mind. And these are the ways of thinking that are necessary for effective classrooms and learning. And they look at persistence, managing impulsivity, listening with understanding and empathy, thinking flexibly, applying past knowledge to new situations, questioning and posing problems, striving for accuracy. You can read them yourself. So these are really interesting because they're not something that people think about need to be part of school learning. But if you don't have all of these skills and you don't develop them, then it's going to be really hard to have this relational understanding, because relational, of course, also means to other people and as well as to yourself. So if you're going to be a successful problem solver, you need to be able to listen with understanding and empathy, because you need to listen to how other people are also solving it, because there's going to be a chance you're going to get stuck and you're going to have to listen and communicate with somebody else. So what we do with our habits of mind is we start to look at what habits of mind do we already have and what habits of mind do we want to work on in this course. And you never know what you're going to get. Most of the inside people talked about wanting more patience and persistence. A lot of them talked about managing impulsivity, which I thought was interesting. We talked about finding humor as being something that's never allowed in a classroom, right? As soon as they start to giggle or laugh, teacher shuts it down. And because, well, that's going to cause behavior problems and we can't go there. Whereas if we laugh, we know you're going to be more open to ideas, right? You're smiling, you're laughing. So we keep coming back to habits of mind and trying to look at what habits of mind have we picked up as we go through this course. This is really powerful. And so every student on the inside and outside gets their own copy of this, and they take it with them every time. And we reflect periodically about where they're at with their habits of mind. This I'll do a little bit more of. This was my favorite article. It's an actual article about math education and urban math education, about what gets checked at the door. And this is the story of a young, I think, middle schooler who considered herself the class clown, wanted to be a comedian. That was her asset. And the way that the teacher used her humor to help with her own development, as well as to draw people into math and to draw people into working together. And this was a good jumping off point to, did I put the next one? I didn't put it in. So what they give them after this is a sun. It's like a sun with rays coming out of it. And they have to write on these rays, what were you asked? What part of your identity was not allowed into your classrooms? What was it about you that wasn't welcome? And because that wasn't welcome, then how did that impact your learning? And what we find as we start to talk to people, it might have been everything from first language, right? This is inside and outside students. First language, humor, asking too many questions, wanting to try something on their own. So this is, you can see, can you see my cursor moving? Can you see my cursor? So this is what they did. This is their identity chart. And each one of these, this is in a final project, is an outside is what was had to, how did they do this? I can't read them to know. Patience. And I don't have the picture because I'm here. Anyway, that's what it was. They had to put on their raise things that they had to check at the door and things that they were allowed in. And so that was a really powerful activity for everybody to do. Social justice and math. So I'm just going to highlight this poster for a little bit because I think that the sheriff's office was really wondering what this was, why there was. So the way that we started this, so this is kind of what it came out to, that this is on the right is Roy. And Roy's comments were before doing this class and before realizing that there are ways that doing their own problem solving for their own communities, there was more guns, crime, all the things that you see there. And this is what he imagines if people could be more involved in their own community, solving their own problems, taking on their own, and seeing that they could actually do it. So, but the STEM and social justice, this was, I wouldn't say it was hard, but I had to make it relevant. And of course I have no technology. I can't bring anything in. So I found a piece from NPR from the Rodney King event. And it showed that, and this had to be math too, that in a 3-mile radius of where Rodney King lived, there were 0 community centers, there were 0 movie theaters, and something like 600 places to buy alcohol. And so we started to think about what our communities look like, right? What's available to us in our communities? And that was they've become very deep discussions about how to take on planning of some sort to try to build more social infrastructure in communities. So that's kind of how we entered into the STEM for social justice. And it was, I mean, talk about seeing people light up. You know, it was really, and at first this conversation started by the inside guy saying to me, well, you're our voice. You're the person that, you know, can, I said, no, maybe, but what if you had your voice? What would you want to do? How would you use this power you have knowing that you're problem solvers to do this? So that's how we brought in the social justice. And then after we did the readings, we went into more multi-step collaborative problems. There's one example of a problem. We don't have to read through them. We're going to run out of time. But these were quite complex problems that they worked on in groups. I did no instruction. I didn't stand up and say, here's the problem, here's how you do it. I would give them the problem. Going back to Jean Piaget, I'm a constructivist educator. Here's the problem. How do you start this? How are you going to get interested in this? How are you going to dig into it? And we usually spend a good hour and 15 minutes on these problems. So this is one example. The wheel shop was fun. So these problems, they were called problems of the month, and they go from level A through to level E. So they start out quite simple and they increase in complexity. And so they can just get as far as they can. That, you know, there's no, you must make it to the end of E. They'll say, hey, Mindy, we're finished with B. Can we have C? Hey, we're finished with C. Can we have D? And we just end where we end. And groups get to different places. This is where you start to see people from one group going up to talk to another group about, hey, how did you do this? What does this mean? This is really, I just go group to group. Does anybody need clarification on what the problem means? I'd ask them questions. You know, I would go to somebody and say, you know, do you need, he said, no, 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 I don't talk. I want to hear how they did it. You know, they'd be like shutting me down because they want to be hearing how each other solved problems. So those are multi-step problems. And then here's the processing and the outcomes. These are students' own words, inside and outside. We grew in our confidence and sureness. We learned that math can be a collaborative and interdependent activity. We applied the math we did to our past experiences and the real world. This leveraged our unique experiences to solve problems that ultimately reflected many people's identities. We learned the value of a non-judgmental environment. Everybody's going to be right. Everybody's going to be wrong. There was no, I can't say any group of students were more privileged in doing math than any other group. I can tell you that. We were all leaders. So group leadership was fluid and organic to the problems and tasks. Once we read the problem and considered it, someone with ideas initiated the discussions and collaboration. We stepped back and listened with understanding and empathy. You can see they're bringing in the habits of mind there. We developed new strengths-based, community-oriented mindsets regarding math and working together. We found a new openness to perspective and ideas. We lost our fear of failure and kept trying as we identified strengths and weaknesses, not only in our strategies, but among us as individuals. At first, it was surprising how many ways there were to solve one problem. Now it's expected, and we want to know more ways than those we alone came up with. I'm going to add on to something one of the inside students said in my final inside class, is he really focused on, there's two of them actually, he really focused on how much he felt that they grew as communicators. They just weren't used to having to talk like that. And that was really impressed upon me. And then the last one, I was just telling Lori that Carlos, who was by far the most mathematical minded in that room. He was an inside student and he just boom, boom, boom. And I'd had to say, Carlos, don't answer this question. Let other people think. Let them get a chance because you're doing this too fast. And he said to me at the end, I wasn't going to come back after the first class. I thought this isn't going to be real math. This is going to be like baby math. And he said, but then once I started telling him, hey, slow down, tell us how you did that. He realized that he learned so much about himself as a thinker and so much about himself as a partner, as a teammate, as a collaborator. He said he never imagined that a math class could teach him that about himself. And so that was really amazing. Ripple effect. When everyone is treated as smart, students feel smart and see smartness in others regardless of their circumstances. A new community of interdependent advocacy and achievement developed. Participants took away new understandings of themselves, those they may have previously judged, and the carceral system overall. And they all came in with assets and challenges and left with new assets they'll continue to develop and share with others and in their communities. We had a lot of stuff going on in the jail in the fall. And they'd mixed up like rooming. So there were a lot of stabbings and a lot of things going on. And we were just in our little room and there was chaos going on around us. And it just didn't matter. Like it just didn't. Sometimes I'd look at the guys and say, what's going on? They'd say, oh, so there's probably a fight, right? But we just kept going. And here's my bonus slide before I end. In my final class with inside students only, one of the students murmured, our teachers wanted us to fail. So my next talk, Lori, is going to be this. Our teachers wanted us to fail. Conversations with incarcerated men about their school experiences. I have a lot of quotes at this point about that. Thank you.
Wow. So what kinds of, that was great. What kinds of questions do folks have? And I would love, Mindy, if you would give us, I don't know, a couple of really simple problems or something to get our minds going.
The math problems, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, well, the problem is I don't have my regular computer, but Well, we can go back to the, let me go to the wheel shop. Hold on, just give me a moment. Talk amongst yourselves.
Well, I mean, let's go to comments and questions. So what are folks thinking about all this?
You know, so I had a chance to visit Mindy's class at the end of the quarter, and again, being intimidated and slightly maybe intrigued by math. I guess at some point you don't really realize that there are mathematicians who are making some policy decisions in our society without any sort of social justice lens. I particularly think about, like, you have these economists that come with this criminal justice proposals, right? That fundamentally change the way that we service people. And they never really think about, like, what are the social costs associated with it. They only think about it as what is the bottom line or what is the profit. And that's their framework, which is great for their space, but it doesn't work well when you're dealing with people. And so I think about it as the potential for Mindy's contribution is that it puts a social lens to those economists who are dealing with math, but just don't have the sort of social justice lens to really think through the policies that they're advocating for.
So one of the other articles about social justice that we read, which was super interesting, well, it was so we did the Rodney King stuff, but then the article that we read of STEM and social justice was looking at, first of all, statistics of how many people of color go into these, but also that the people who do study these STEM subjects aren't interested in their application to social justice. And so it's hard to find graduate advisors. It's hard to, get enough people to run courses. And so they're just not opportunities in higher education to do this. And so even if you do it, there's no place to go, right? It's terminal. And that was really surprising. And so what the Inside guys wanted to do was look at STEM schools in the Chicago public schools and how many there were and what they were doing. And what we found was there's a lot of them. Chicago public schools seems to have a priority for that. But then I started looking into the data for them, and it's like almost all of them were at the bottom tier of the Illinois school report card. And the absenteeism level in the high schools was literally like 60, 70%. So what's the point in having a STEM high school when nobody's coming? Right? So it is like, Avi, it's all talk, right? Nobody's walking the walk. There are people making these decisions who don't understand how to get people into the schools and how to keep them there, right? We can't see your first name because it's just A. Alvarado.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Alejandra, and I work at Eastern Illinois University, and I'll be teaching in the spring at Danville Correctional Facility, which is, I think it's like an hour or two from Chicago. I've taught a class there, a gen ed math class there last year for my first time, and it's all Insight students. And I'll be teaching this spring for the second time a gen ed math class, but this one is more of a problem solving class, writing intensive. But what I found last semester was the range of students that take this class. It could be anybody from the basic math to students that have already taken calculus. And so I don't know if you have anything to share or to help with in that.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you these. So this is what I learned from my mathematician friend. So it's called Inside Mathematics. And so here's how we start. So we do this particular problem, and it starts with pretty simple pre-K stuff. And then it goes into, oh, hold on, I have to go back to this one. It goes all the way up to problems that require really intense modeling. And each of these problems has 5 levels. And so they can go as far as they want, or, you know, they get exhausted. We're usually exhausted after doing these for an hour. And it really allows people to focus on the same concept. In this case, it's geometric growth and geometry. And it also opens up the space for students who need more and who are not ready for the next challenge. And so this is, you know, these are what I learned from the mathematics that I worked with, in understanding that we want to keep the topic and the subject consistent, because it's too hard for teachers to have this person doing fractions and this person doing, you know, measurement. So you can keep it common, and at the same time allow people to go, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here, but they have all of the grade levels as well as different topic areas that you can choose from. I don't know what you see on your screen. What do you see?
Oh,
Does that help? I can,
yeah.
I'll put this in the chat. And really it's kind of the only way that I can do this now, because I mean, I in all honesty, the inside students tend to get farther in the problem solving, because these problems do require more flexible thinking. And how do I paste here?
Yeah, and we also have the same problem in that I can't bring any electronics inside, and whatever handouts I want to give, I think they gotta get approved 2 weeks ahead of time. And we meet once a week for 3 hours, which makes it hard to like really plan ahead.
So that's the same as us.
Yeah, they
And
do
so
have books. There are some books that we bring them and that stay with them for the whole semester. So that helps. So that means I have to mostly stick to the book, because that's the one resource they have.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to have an offline conversation too about how I do this. And so I might take 4 or 5 of these problems. And the other thing I learned from working with mathematicians is never be afraid to leave, we call them status posters. Just here's the status of where we're at now in our math, and we're going to come back to it next week. That used to freak me out as a teacher, especially like a regular teacher. And I learned from Lynn, no, that's real problem solving, right? It's problems aren't wrapped up with bows at the end of, you know, however much time. And so, but I have to do that too. I don't bring in books. I don't have the resources for textbooks. And so I do the copying and I bring it in, and it is just a lot of planning. But I think I used 3 or 4 of these, and you know, there's one of the when we were talking about things that get checked at the door and our assets, one of the outside students said, you know, I always found it was easy to give up. As soon as one person gave up, I was always the second person, because the teacher's always going to give us the answer anyway, right? Why would I keep going? And then one of the inside students said, I never give up on a problem. And that used to get me in trouble in school because I wasn't going fast enough. And so I decided to pair them the next week. Okay, you like to give up, you never give up. Let's see what you do. And it was amazing to see. I mean, the dialogue, I could have sat with just the 2 of them for the whole time. And it is getting these resources in, and it is getting, and so I see that the math for social justice, I want to keep the problems. I don't like to do math problems for social justice. I like the context of the social justice to lead the dialogue, but I keep the problems themselves neutral. They're just problems that people can relate to. One was about bicycles. They've all experienced a bicycle. One was about squirrels in the park, right? Like really neutral problems, because it just keeps I found that it keeps the dialogue more focused, and they're really seeing what each other can bring to a neutral space. And so, not that I don't love, I do have social justice, and I would absolutely encourage you to do that, but also just maybe think about keeping the math neutral and letting the social justice lead the dialogue around the conversations.
Hello.
Hi.
I love a lot of what you're saying, like the social justice aspect of, I'm a former inside student, so like a lot of what you're sharing, it touches home. I think like some of the social justice aspects of it, like I was part of a prison. It's a really progressive thinking. I'm in British Columbia, Canada, actually.
I went to
And
UBC. There you go. My
yeah,
undergrad from UBC. Yeah.
so the prison I was in, they have like a treatment center in prison. It's a like community as method where you rely on the people around you to provide some of that structure, right? And I think that's what Inside Out does, is it provides that community and a bridge between university students and inside students. That's social justice in itself, right? It's like that's what wrapped my mind around, hey, when I get out, I can go to university now, and I'm currently taking community mental health worker at VIU. But like some of that will happen naturally in your classes, and I think that's yeah, just allow that growth and that bridging of understanding. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to speak to that, and yeah, thank you for all your sharing.
That's super important too, though, because if you go back to hold on, I gotta get to where's my Zoom? You know, we continue to look at things. So if we go to this and we go to the course and what the Inside Out praxis says, when higher education, when higher education and learning is made widely accessible at the same time, if you look at what it does, it's bringing incarcerated and non-incarcerated people together for engaged and informed dialogue. And I think what's unique about this course is that the dialogue naturally comes to experiences and those social differences while they talk about the math, right? Like it does that. And so when we talk about like how you'd want your table set up, right? It speaks to what your family, what your community is looking like. One of the guys in there, his father and his brother and his cousin are all in there. And so you would talk about like and they all have the same judge. That's how I learned. And they would talk about the dinner table, what he imagines the Thanksgiving table was going to look like. And so those kinds of things really come up, right? But then there's also the outside student who is living here and doesn't speak English as a first language and doesn't have any place to go, right? And like, what does that look like? And it's just amazing. You're right, just that environment in and of itself. And it's kind of like the math problems, it's just the vehicle to get them to talk. And we had one outside student who she was having such a hard day. And afterwards I said, I was talking to her after and I said, what's going on? She said, I couldn't solve the problem as fast as Darian. Which I did this on purpose, is one of the inside students. And I said, isn't that amazing that you couldn't? Like, isn't that amazing I said, why would you expect that you could? What? Darian's super smart. And I said, maybe you're not slowing down. He's speeding up because he's realizing he can do it and he can keep up with you. So you want to be together, right? You don't want to be outperforming. And that was a real like pivotal moment for her. And it wasn't really about the math. It was about finding that equilibrium. Right? And yeah, well, there was somebody, Chris, he was one of my coaches. Chris, what was his last name? Lamoureux. He was one of my coaches in the Inside Out from BC as
I
well.
was actually we were inside together,
Really?
and
Well,
we've moved on. We've done the instructors trainings, and yeah,
say hello to him if you
yeah, for sure.
Chris was amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah. Others. Oh, hearts. Other people have questions?
So, Mindy, remind me, the class that you're talking about, was that the first and only time that
No, it
you,
was the second time.
second time? Okay. Did you see any differences between the first and second times?
Yes. So, well, first of all, I learned a lot more about what it means to have a paper band and how to manage that.
Yep.
The second time, the outside students were much different, and they were a lot quieter, I think. And so the inside guys felt like they had to do a lot of work to keep conversations going. But in terms of the progress of the class, I think it had the same feeling, it had the same tone. The biggest difference, the biggest thing I changed was doing the readings on the inside all the time and not having students do outside homework. It just wasn't going to work. And that actually kept them more in step, because the outside students are always going to do their homework. Inside students are not always going to do their homework. And so I didn't want that inequity to come to happen again. So everything was done in the space. Everything was done there all the time. And I felt like that was much, much better. So when they did their final posters, you saw a little bit of the poster, that was their final project. Everybody was more in lockstep, and there were no, I didn't have to worry about bringing things in or not bringing things in. So it was much more collaborative in that sense, I think.
Okay.
Hi, Helen.
Helen, welcome. We're just wrapping up. I don't know if did you know
I
that?
did that central time, Eastern
Oh,
time, especially as the person who sent this flyer around. You think, I'm so sorry. I do know Mindy's work pretty well. So, and she's great, and
yeah.
it's really, really wonderful to have STEM inside. They're really hungry for it. And so,
Mhm.
so I'm so sorry. I was on 2 other meetings,
Yeah,
in the
well,
time, so.
don't worry about it. Speaking of which, I need to actually step off for another meeting, but Mindy is a co-host, so she can stay on to wrap things up. If that's okay with people, I'm so sorry. And Mindy, fabulous job. Thank you so much for doing this, and it's great work.
Okay, we'll
So I'm
talk to you.
just gonna
I can
kinda
stay on. So if people
Okay, I'm
want
just gonna disappear.
Okay.
Whoop.
Bye, Lori.
How do I do that without ending it?
I think you can leave. Well, maybe make me host then.
Yes, I almost ended the whole thing.
That's what happens when we have Zooms in the jail, right? Because they only have like 40-minute things, and then like, so it's over. All right, we're done.
That was part of we had all had to
Oh.
up, to,
All right,
Okay,
I'm the host now.
yep.
perfect.
Okay,
Mm.
Lori still can't leave.
Ugh, I'm so confused.
Maybe I can kick you out. Oh, there we go. So, Alejandra, I was going to show you something else. You were asking, oh, did I lose it though? Was it this? So I wanted to show you sort of what something would look like. So if you go to 3rd grade, a lot of these same things will appear again in 4th grade and in 5th grade. And so that's how you can structure the kind of the stepping of them up more and more. And I've found it to be, and then I also introduce in doing this idea of it's okay to not finish it, and it's okay to not like get it all right all at once, right? Like it's okay to stop where you need to stop and wait for somebody to come and work with them. And so it actually is kind of a nice teaching tool as well to be able to do it. Jason?
Thanks, Mindy. That was super interesting. I'm just trying to sort of picture things. So just kind of a clarification question, I guess. But were your outside students also sort of coming in with different levels? Were they education students, or what kind of students were they? Were they math students or?
So this time there was one education student, and I have to say she kind of came in thinking she had nothing to learn, which was sort of interesting and annoying all at the same time. But there was a film student, accounting, one crim student who was terrified to speak. No, so they're not math students. I've had one. Piazza last year was a math student, and he really struggled because he really struggled with being able to talk about how he knew things and work collaboratively with others who were stuck. And then when he was stuck because he hadn't formed relationships with others, he was kind of all alone. It was an interesting dynamic. But no, they're not math students. And in fact, they come in with all the same things that Javi just said, you know, and he came in like, is this math going to be hard? Am I going to be able to do it? Am I, you know, they have all these same anxieties, but yet there's drawn to the context, right? And because they're drawn to the context, they're willing to take a chance. Even my TA was like, oh, Mindy, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that. I knew her from another class. I don't know if I can do the math. And she just talks about her growth in it, just by the nature of being able to talk to others, and kind of what Trevor was saying, right? Like just being in that space, you turn around and say, did you get that? How did you, like, problems are all about access, right? So how did you start this? And I had that specific question, who starts the problems? And they said, whoever has an idea. They don't look to any one person to do it, which I thought really interesting. That was a question I had, that was just whoever has the first idea. And if they can't agree on a way to start the problem, then they start it in separate ways and see how they come together.
Yeah, and then when you come back for the discussion, then you kind of go around and kind of talk about how you work through the problem, or what the process was. Is that
Oh,
kind of how
we
you do
talk
that?
about how you solve the problem, what were the different ways you solved the problem, the math of it, and we talk about what were some of the things that you learned, what were some of the struggles you had as a group, like what were some of
Mm.
the dynamics that you had to negotiate, because usually I'd say I want your group to come to a consensus on the response. You don't have to come to a consensus on how you do it. And they'd say we couldn't come to a consensus because, we couldn't agree on which table would be better, right? Because we had these different things. And so they would have to talk about the social process as well as the mathematical process. So it's pretty interesting to see. And that's, I think that also shows them that it's not all about getting the right answer. It's about working as a community to advance what you're doing. And one of the groups at the end, only one of them in their final project, they kind of couldn't wait for the direction. So they went in their own direction, which was fine. But they came up with, they wanted to use, which was my original idea too for this course, was they wanted to use their newly sort of empowered agency in doing math to come up with a program that would bus some of their kids out of the community to do safe activities somewhere. And that came from two of the inside guys. First, they were like, joking and whatever. And they said, remember we had that program, we were kids and they take us to Indiana. That was so fun. And it kept us out of trouble for the day. And they said, well, what if we wanted to do that in our community? Well, we need to get buses. We need to find a space. We need to pay people to do it. We need t-shirts. We need snacks. We need this. And it just took off. And so all of a sudden they're the ones in charge. they're the ones coming up with the business plan. And they said at the end, who was it? I think it was Stephen at the end who said, because my husband's a businessman and he came to the last class, and Stephen said after, like, I felt like a businessman. I felt like I could have a conversation with somebody in business with confidence, because they had and so Kyle, the chair of the math department, would say, well, did you think about how much this? Yes, we did, actually. Here's what we did. Well, did you think about this? Yes, we did think about it. And they're like, they just were so confident and proud of, we can do this, right? We don't have to have other people making our decisions for us, kind of like Javi said before about, people making math curriculum, mathematicians. We don't need other people to make our decisions for us. We can do this. So it's pretty fun.
I think you'll find that with most inside students, because like in general, you're given a set of rules and you've stepped outside of that. Like you've broken the law to get inside, right? But that's looking at rules and then looking outside of it, right? And finding solutions. Like even if it is just survival mode, you're finding solutions outside of the norm. And I think like what Inside Out does is it provides an avenue to do it in a way that connects to the community. So like, yeah, you'll find people get really motivated. Like once you give someone a chance who's never had a chance, it's absolutely beautiful what their minds can come up with.
And so that's interesting. Before I even heard about Inside Out, before I knew about any of this, I have a class I teach for across the university. It's so we have these Science as a Way of Knowing classes. It's a How People Learn class. And I always focus one class on this smart, not smart idea. And I had found this TED Talk by a guy by the name of Jeff Smith, who was a Missouri state senator. And he got caught doing something bad in one of his campaigns and was sent to federal prison. I want to say it was Georgia State Prison. No, yeah, federal prison. And he talked about the genius he saw on the inside and the business savvy and the business genius. It wasn't all used for good, for sure, right? But he couldn't believe like how under considered his the people on the inside were in terms of their abilities to solve problems, develop business plans, all of these same principles. He said, like, I didn't learn any better at the Wharton School of Business, which I think that's Harvard's business school. I'd never even heard of it before I heard what he said. And that was another thing that like got me thinking, because they're in the math education literature, there's really strong literature about, the research was done in Brazil, and Brazilian street kids who would do these amazing calculations in their minds in the markets, and they failed school every year, right? Failed math every year because they weren't allowed to do it on their own terms, right? And so between that and then Jeff Smith doing it and then hearing about Inside Out, that's where I have to do this class, right? I have to show that there is so much that school math and schooling probably in general denies us and denies people who don't fit their model of what it means to memorize, parrot back, what if we could really think on our own? Like what if, right? So yeah, getting like all like, I get almost teary when this happens, because seeing it for real, it was pretty amazing. Like I can't believe I took so long to find this program, and Helen and Javi, my new best friends. Like, all right, other questions? I can I'm gonna put I think you all have my Alejandra, if you wanna, oh, that went to Marissa. No, it's gotta go to you. She's not even here anymore. She can't get that. I should do it to everyone. that I'm happy to send any of the individual slides. I know Lori has, oh, can I do that? Can I actually upload? Anyway, I'm happy to send that out. It'll have like the nice habits of mind matrix, which is amazing, to just for every classroom, doesn't matter which classroom it is, and some of the problems and yeah. It's nice seeing you all. Jason, when's yours?
I think it's the 11th.
What's yours about?
So that's next week. It's I had a book that was published recently, that was about some research that I did with formerly incarcerated older people in Japan.
Oh.
So right now they got a real issue with the aging prison population in Japan, and with older people reoffending, going back into prison multiple times. So I was spending time with them, trying to see what their life was like. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that.
Oh, I'm excited to hear that. All right. Thank you for coming. Say hi to Chris for me, Trevor. It's nice.
Yeah, will do.
He came to one of my classes and one of these smart, not smart, and told his story, which I didn't know, right? Because we never ask people's stories. And he
Yeah,
told the story, and it was like, wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, so many people come from a place of success and then like one minor mistake, one slip of emotions, and that's it. You're inside jail. So, yeah.
All right. It's nice meeting you. Bye, Javi.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Bye, Jason.